Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I'd like to share a few thoughts on La Bastarda by Trifonia Melibea Obono. This is an extraordinary short novel. It's set in the author's native Equatorial Guinea, and it focuses on a young woman, Okomo. She's a teenager, she's coming of age, she's discovering her sense of identity, and she's recognizing the boundaries of the life that she's been born into. Her mother died in childbirth, her father had never paid a dowry, never paid a bride price, and so he does not claim her. She's in every sense an orphan. She lives with her grandparents in a village, and she's existing in the traditional Fang culture there in Equatorial Guinea. And she's realizing just how limiting her life has been. She faces micro and macro aggressions every day of her life. The novel opens when she's a teenager, but it's very clear that she has endured a past of slights, of being mistreated, of just consistently feeling other and left out. There's a way in which she is outside of their traditional culture. She's a burden on her family. And in some ways, it's almost like she's a curse. And we see how that gets imputed towards her uncle Marcelo, who also has discovered that his identity exists outside of the traditional culture, and that he is explicitly blamed as like this practitioner of witchcraft who's laid a curse upon the village. And it's clear that Okomo realizes she's sort of being grouped in that way, and her grandmother is terrified that she will ultimately, not fit in some way. And so the book is short, but it progresses through this period of time for Okomo where she is really recognizing, like, this is the life I've been told I need to lead, and all of the benefits such that they are that life can hold. But at the very same time, everything in me is straining in a different way. There's something different about how I feel. There's something different about what I desire, and the life I want. And it does not fit in with what this village is. And it doesn't even necessarily fit in with the city life that is somehow or the town life that is perhaps better or wealthier, but it's not necessarily what Como wants. So I wanted to give a sample of the writings just so you can have a sense of the voice that Trifonia Melibea Obono has in her book. After walking half a kilometer down a path that was optimistically called a highway, but was barely an earthen track, we moved into the forest. Don't be friends with those girls. They're indecent and mysterious, I remembered my grandmother saying. But these three teenage girls defended my uncle because they thought he should live as a free man. With their baskets on their backs, they said that he had become an example for them to follow, and having dared to challenge the council of elders of the tribe. The tribe to which I owed my respect and obedience? I wondered, walking behind the three girls. Only Dina was already 18 years old. She revealed herself to have a strong character and looked at everyone discreetly, but fearlessly. The second woman was Pilar, a very quiet orphan. In the village, people whispered that her mother had died from witchcraft, and since then her father had sworn off women, despite not leading a religious life. In the house of the word, my grandfather asked him where his seed rested if he didn't have a wife. He remained silent. Pilar had a suitor, Placido. I discovered this because he had once given me a letter to deliver to her at school. I opened it and inside saw a drawing of a heart. How jealous I was. Nobody had ever given me such a gift. The three girls spoke of Marcella with much affection, especially Linda. She was as pretty as her name indicated, with lovely eyes and an even lovelier bottom. I always noticed her charms with some anxiety, for I knew my feelings were supposed to be for a man, as tradition decreed. A man I didn't yet know, and who, according to my grandmother, must have money. Linda described the kiss on her forehead my uncle had given her one day as the most loving kiss of her life, and complained that her father never even spoke to her, unless it was to order her to do something. It was here, she said, touching the center of her forehead with the palm of her hand. She was standing in front of us, smiling, a basket on her back like all Fang women. We stopped to rest from the long walk. We sat on one side of the path and began to tell one another stories about our lives. I had nothing to say. What could I talk about? The constant fighting, my perpetual loneliness, my father's abandonment. The heroes of my tribe who only worried about getting women pregnant? Of course not. My life lacked excitement, but I thought of one topic of conversation, how much I hated my braids. Oh, how I hated them. I also detested lipstick, eyeshadow, blush, and everything else used to paint women's faces. And so we have this sense of finding some friendship, finding people of a like mind, someone kindred spirits that Como can spend time with and just be herself with. There's mention there of sort of what she's been told about why she should be proud of this tribe that just constantly mistreats and treats her as a second-class individual within the community. And her grandfather always goes on about, oh, there's this hero who, did these things, and here's how many wives he had, here's how many sons he had. And the grandmother periodically gets in a slide about, well, who were the women? How many daughters did they have? Who were all of these wives? What were their names? And it's clear that Okomo is recognizing that the way that this community has been set up, that this extreme patriarchy where the men are expected to just produce as many sons as possible, and that is how they will be regarded. And that women are truly just objectified as vessels for childbirth, is not a future she wants. It's not a future she desires. Her grandmother, in a sense, seems to recognize the limitations of this life, and yet is willing to, scrape and save and beg for 50,000 francs in order to pay someone to go and like ensure that the grandfather will return to her bed, even though she's older now, instead of spending the nights with his younger second wife. This life is just something that Okomo does not want. It's also clear from that small passage that she is recognizing her own queer desires, that she is not particularly interested in marrying a wealthy husband or marrying any husband. That's not what she desires. And it's part of why her uncle Marcelo is such a crucial character as well, because he has chosen to live in the forest outside of the village community, and is explicitly queer as well. And so the way that Trifonia Melibea Obono like builds up these characters and paints each of them in such a way that we can recognize who they are and dip into their minds, dip into their hearts a little bit, while exploring the culture in the village, and ultimately allowing characters to condemn it rather than she herself as the author condemning it, is interesting. It's interesting to see how she pushes against these and says, wait a second, what does this future mean? If this is a culture that says that the queer man is to blame for his cousin being a sterile man, or that someone is to blame for this rather than that someone had contracted syphilis and not told anyone, then what is this culture bringing? Who is it lifting up? And what is the opportunity for someone like Okomo or Dina or Linda or Pilar or Marcelo, and what type of community can they create, and how would it compare with this village? And so it works very well on many levels. It is short. There's not necessarily a lot of explicit violence or even explicit descriptions of sexuality, but there is much that is sketched and noted. So there are trigger warnings for this. But it is, I think, a fantastic window into a life that some are leading, and the trials that they're facing as they lead that. So I was reminded of a couple of different writers. Certainly I was reminded of Notes of a Crocodile by Miaojin, the explicitly queer book from Taiwan about 35 years ago. Additionally, I think The Adventures of China Iron by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, again, a sort of queer feminist retelling of the founding epic of Argentina, and the way that various individuals, found their identities, found their lives out on the frontiers of the Pampas. It's just a fantastic book. I was reminded of Maru by Bessie Head, and in part the way that patriarchal societies were examined and probed against and pushed at to reveal limitations that exist within them inherently. And also, of course, the African setting. Certainly I was reminded of The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, not just because of the age of the main narrator, but also some of the events that occur, the way that young women, as teenagers are growing into young women, the dangers that they face from men everywhere. Certainly the introduction of the idea that there would be men who are going and constantly finding as many sexual partners as possible, as that's how they prove their manhood in some way, and within that giving syphilis to others, recalls Ghosts from Henrik Ibsen. And the way in which rural queer identities push against sort of rural traditions reminds me of the writer James Leo Herlihy, famous for Midnight Cowboy, but also his stories in A Story That Ends With a Scream, I think, reveal his life and how he was facing comparable challenges. So let me know if you've read this. Certainly, I would be interested in reading more from Melibea Obono, seeing sort of how she continues as an academic to examine this. This one was translated by Lawrence Schimel. So I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.